Hi, everybody. I'm Nathan Thomas, the General Manager of Amazon Workspaces. Really excited to be here today on the last session of the last day of the very first Reinforce conference. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around. Obviously, folks are starting to think about getting ready for this evening's festivities, so thanks for coming around. Good news with a smaller group, we've got plenty of time for questions, and if anybody has any questions, we can kind of get together and make sure we get everything answered. So, as I said, I'm Nathan Thomas, joined here with Ron Bledsoe from Bridgewater. So today we're going to be talking about AWS end-user computing and the security approach for that. So we're going to start off just with some background, make sure everybody knows exactly what AWS end-user computing is all about. Then we're going to cover Amazon Workspaces in a little bit more depth and some of the concepts that make Amazon Workspaces secure by default and have a security-first approach. And then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what Ron's done over at Bridgewater to make that Workspaces environment secure inside of his business environment. So first off, end-user computing at AWS. So there's several different products that make up end-user computing for us. First off is Amazon Workspaces. So these are desktops in the cloud. We're going to be talking in more depth about this, but in a very simple manner, think about having a Windows or Linux desktop that's running inside of an EC2 instance that you can connect to visually. So you're putting in all of your mouse clicks and you're getting back all of your video output, and that's a streamed session you can connect to. Pretty straightforward. Second is AppStream 2.0. So AppStream 2.0 is similar. The idea is connecting to a desktop application in the cloud. So it's a single application that you're connecting and allowing multiple users to connect to different applications from different client-side environments. This works from web browsers and desktop clients. We see customers using this for cases where they need to have a lot of users connect to just a single application that they need to get their jobs done. Then is Amazon WorkLink. Amazon WorkLink is mobile access to intranet sites. So it allows your mobile device to have browser access into intranet sites in a secure fashion. So kind of think of this like VPN access, but only for mobile client device access into the intranet. Means that when you're in a place where you don't have full desktop, you don't have full access, you can get into those core assets in that moment when you need them for access from anywhere. And then lastly, Amazon WorkDocs. So Amazon WorkDocs is for file sync, collaboration, and share. So this lets you take content that you've generated and put it into the cloud. It means you can access it from multiple different device types, from clients of various varieties, as well as from products like Workspaces. So you can have file access from multiple locations. And then it also gives you ways to do commenting, sharing, and editing of content as well. So you have a wide range of uses on top of that. So those are the core of the end-user computing components for AWS. But today, we're going to dive into Workspaces a little bit further from a security perspective. So Amazon Workspaces, as I said before, are really just desktops in the cloud. So if you think about connecting from any device, getting that streamed video output and interacting with it. This is something where our customers are using Workspaces as a means to give access to desktops to their employees, and they're using it in a lot of cases, the places where traditional desktops and laptops just haven't made a huge amount of sense for them. So that might be cases like contractors, offshore developers, mobile workers. Any place where you've got variability in labor force is very common. So if you've got spin up and shut down scenarios where you need to have people have access, we see a lot of M&A activity. We see a lot of places where customers have to onboard or offboard a lot of customers. The net result is there are now tens of thousands of customers running hundreds of thousands of workspaces globally. And these are customers across wide ranges of industries, from financial services to pharma and healthcare and life sciences to educational customers to all sorts of governments around the world. So it's a product that has a broad base of users, and of course those users are who drive our innovation and drive our approach for the product. So definitely a product I recommend everybody go give a shot to, give it a try. I think you get very hands-on very quickly with it if you haven't used it to date. I see hands for questions. We'll take questions right at the end of the session.
Quick
Yes, this is very similar to VDI, so virtual desktop, exactly. So it's like VDI, but running inside the cloud, where the idea is that you don't have to take responsibility for all of the scaling, hardware creation, all of the other components for managing VDI. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so just a quick refresher then on what makes up Workspaces, in case folks haven't looked at it or have taken a look at it a while back. So first off, from a client perspective, connecting to Workspaces, you can connect from any desktop clients for Mac or for PC, so Windows or Mac clients, mobile clients, so this will be tablets, Android, and iPad, and web browsers, so connect from Firefox or from Chrome. Also, we also support thin client devices, such as Teradata and piece over IP devices. From an operating system perspective, a workspace, when you launch it, can be Windows 10, Windows 7, or Amazon Linux. So Amazon Linux 2.0. And then, of course, when you launch a workspace, you're going to want to define a set of hardware it's running on. So you want to pick a hardware type. So we have hardware types ranging from what we call the value bundle up to the performance pro bundle, and then we have graphics and graphics pro bundles. These have a wide range of CPU, memory, disk, and network capabilities, as well as, again, GPU added in some cases. Now, making that decision is not a one-way door. You can pick that type and then change your mind after the fact. So you can always go back and reboot those workspaces in most cases to change between bundle types, which means that you can add more capacity as you need it to the capabilities of a particular machine. And then, of course, like the rest of AWS products, the pricing is pay-as-you-go. So you can choose whether you want an auto-stop workspace, which is billed by the hour, or an always-on workspace, which is billed by the month, depending on how much you expect to use it over a period of time. So you can really optimize your cost model. In addition, we do offer the ability to use your own licenses for Windows operating systems. So for under the BYOL program, you can use your existing Microsoft EA agreement, which lets you have your own license that you bring in. This can reduce the price of Workspaces because we wouldn't provide the license for the Windows components to you. All right, so hopefully a little bit of background that was helpful. So today's focus, of course, is on the security focus for Workspaces. And what we really want to highlight is that Workspaces is built with a bunch of inherent advantages from a security perspective. So obviously, we spend a lot of time dealing with individual features or capabilities or components in Workspaces that are focused on security. We spend a lot of time making sure things are patched and updated in desktops. And there's a wide range of activities we do to monitor and make sure that Amazon Workspaces are an incredibly secure environment. But there's a lot of things about the product that really are inherently designed from the beginning as a security-first approach. And so it's sort of the cloud desktop inherent advantage around security that we want to talk about a little bit more today. And so we're going to dive into 4 major areas. So first off is keeping data off of devices. So obviously there's a lot of challenges these days with devices getting lost and stolen. Let's talk a little bit about what we do in the Workspaces world on that front. VPC as the security perimeter. So where exactly does your secure network start and end? We think there's a very different answer when you've got your desktop sitting in the cloud. Segmented access. So today you obviously have some ways to do this with laptops or with desktops traditionally, but there's a lot of mechanisms built into the way that we use VPCs and other configuration elements with Workspaces that means you get that by default. And then, of course, there's this idea of treating desktops as code. So once you move to an API-driven desktop environment in the cloud, managed a lot more like your server environments, it's something you manage in a way that's more like code. It's more like something you invest in and evolve over time, which really gives you the chance to monitor and automate in ways that you wouldn't have previously with a bunch of physical desktops floating around. All right, so let's dive into these a little bit. So first off, let's talk about keeping data and applications off of devices. So client device loss has been a pretty significant problem for the industry for a large period of time. Certainly as long as I've been in the industry, the idea of losing laptops, losing hard drives, losing desktops has been a major problem for companies. And in a way, it's kind of crazy to think about the idea that we're going to take all of our sensitive company data, all of the apps, many of the tools necessary to have access to our networks, and we're going to put them on a bunch of physical devices that leave the building every day. And then we're going to put them out there where people can get them and not have any visibility to that. And of course, we've tried various solutions to this. We have encrypted disks, which certainly help. But there's a wide range of concerns still around what happens when I lose a laptop or lose that data. From a Workspaces perspective, we really don't think that's a big issue anymore. So you're connecting to your data in the cloud, that you're connecting in a secure manner, and you are streaming out only video output of that. So if you lose the device you were connecting from, it doesn't give much information to the attacker that's gotten that device. So we don't believe that client device loss is important in the Workspaces environment. Secondly, the authentication to the desktop itself can now include MFA. So when you think about logging into a desktop today, you're going to use a username, you're going to use a password in the case of most Windows desktops. When you get into that, you have access to a wide range of apps and data on that physical device. Now, of course, we go further when we actually let folks attach to the network. So most people, when you're using a VPN, you're going to put in some sort of third factor. So you're going to have username, password, and a multi-factor authentication token or some sort of third factor auth. But that's only gating access into the corporate network. What we do in the Workspaces environment, if you enable MFA, is that actually gates access into the desktop itself. So that is, you can't connect to the desktop unless you're using MFA in that sense. So that means username and some sort of third token when you're logging in. And so we feel like there's a very big distinction in that you then don't have that apps and data access without that MFA componentry. And then lastly is segmenting policies between client devices and Amazon Workspaces. Now this gets a little bit nuanced, but with traditional environments that you have to provide to your end users, the end user expectation is that they can do a wide range of personal activities on their corporate devices. Now you may not think that's the case, but if you think about what users want, they want to be able to go and browse the web. They want to use Reddit or use some of the websites that they hit on a regular basis from their company laptops and company devices. And they can get pretty angry if they begin to have those capabilities curtailed, right? So the belief is that they have the ability to do what they want to do, but then of course they're connected to your corporate network and they're connected in ways that are a trusted device behavior. That's obviously a risk factor. So it means when they're going out and they're hitting websites and getting content, they're getting exposure to threat vectors that you would rather not have for a device that you're trusting in some fashion. So if you're using a cloud desktop, you're using Amazon Workspaces, that means you can begin to segment those two worlds, right? And so we really think of the Amazon Workspace as being a work device. It is the place where you're doing the work for your business. The client that you're connecting from is not that device. So the client you're connecting from, if it's a Windows PC, if it's a MacBook, that can have a browser on it, and the end user can be doing what they want in that environment. And so you can have a more liberal policy around what you allow them to do in that environment versus what you're doing inside the workspace. And you can do that without causing user revolt, right? So the users aren't going to get annoyed by not having those access points. But you protect the workspace by going and having that more curtailed environment in terms of the websites you have or the group policy you apply. So that segmentation is not just a byproduct or an accident. It winds up being a very intentional part of the security model for workspaces. So the second area I wanted to dive into is moving the security perimeter to the VPC. So today, when you build out sites and locations and offices for your employees, it's pretty traditional to roll out a full network and a LAN or a WAN out to those environments, right? So you're going to set up a new office in Milwaukee, you're going to set up an MPLS network to get there, you're going to deploy a Wi-Fi network inside of that building, probably physical port network inside of that building, a whole bunch of networking gear that lives there to do that. And you're going to establish some sort of a VPN tunnel between that and your core locations, and that becomes a trusted network. You now have a trusted endpoint where somebody can physically plug into a port in Milwaukee. You can't see it. You're not really 100% sure what's going on there all the time, but it's part of your network now. And there were good reasons that that was the case. The reason you want to do that is because you need to give your employees access to the apps and the data and the websites that they need to do their jobs. Makes perfect sense. But when you move to having a workspace environment, when you put your desktops themselves inside the cloud, you don't really have to have that anymore, right? What you need is a mechanism to get to your desktop. Well, the Workspaces client does TLS 1.2 authentication. It's encrypted at AES-256 for the video outputs. It's pretty much the same thing as your VPN client in a lot of cases. And at that point, you've got an access point that gets you into your environment that is in the cloud rather than something where you have the access point be a distributed site in a distributed location. And that means that your security boundary really is the VPC where your workspace is running. So where you have that ENI published for your workspace, that's the critical component. Now that ENI that's published for your workspace is the network interface where your end user traffic from the workspaces themselves is going. And to be clear, that's an ENI that's published as a virtual interface inside of your VPC. And so that VPC is something you own. The security group for that ENI is something you own. And so it means that you've got a great deal more control over the traffic originating from the workspace than you would over most physical laptops that your end users might have. So you've got that device that's out there in the world, a laptop, a desktop. That traffic is going through a bunch of other things before it comes to you. You don't necessarily have that access and that control. In the Workspaces environment, that ENI, it's yours. So you want to publish that through a proxy. You want to control the web traffic, see what's going on and off of it, make sure that it's protected and safe. That's entirely up to you. And tools like being able to do the monitoring that we just launched actually here at Inforce, so you can actually mirror that traffic. All of those things work on that ENI. So it's a great capability to have more control over the network from the workspace itself. All right, third, I want to talk a little bit about segment access for user groups. So Amazon Workspaces are really aligned to VPCs and directories. So when you launch an Amazon Workspace, you're going to define you want it to be in a particular VPC, and you want to use a particular Active Directory or Active Directory connector to aggregate that workspace, to put that workspace in. So Active Directory access from the cloud for Workspaces can be done in a few different ways. So you can launch a fully managed AD in the cloud. You can launch a simple AD, so a lighter weight AD. Or you can actually do a connection back to your own on-premises Active Directory. So that's what we call an AD connector that connects back in. So when you launch a workspace, you're going to pick which of those types you're doing, and you're going to assign that workspace to being part of a particular directory. When that happens, each of those directories is then associated with a VPC. And so every individual workspace winds up being part of a directory or part of a VPC. And those directories and VPCs are the primary place where you're defining the characteristics from a security perspective of that workspace. So that is, you're defining what's the network access going to be. You're defining what's the security configuration, what's the group policy going to be for that workspace. And so it begins to really build in this inherent model around the access capabilities that individual users and individual workspaces have from the very beginning. Now, this is something you could clearly do with desktops and with laptops. You could be building the infrastructure to do this. But in our case, it's something that just kind of comes along as part of the design of the product from the beginning. So in addition to that, in addition to having the segmentation in terms of the VPC and in segmentation in terms of the directory, the Workspaces product itself is built on the idea of full segmentation down through the virtual machine layer. So every workspace is a full virtual machine. So effectively think of this like EC2 instances. So there are approaches that are not like this. We could have done something called shared session, where you actually have more than one instance running on a single operating system instance. So for example, running multiple users on a single Windows instance. That's not what we do here. Everything is full virtual machine, full segmentation. So we rely at the hypervisor layer for the segmentation for workspaces. So it means that you've got 100% certainty that there's no possible cross-pollination, no possible way that data is getting back and forth between those instances. In addition to that, when you're using the Bring Your Own License product, you can run your workspaces on dedicated hardware. So if that's something where you're going to get down to an even greater layer of segmentation from external customers or other folks, we do have a dedicated hardware option on top of that. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about desktop as code. So this is a kind of an interesting concept. Desktops traditionally, and I would say in general, the IT function associated with end user computing has been focused on providing point solutions that are solutions that roll out, they exist for a period of time, and then they're done, and they go away. It's kind of more of a product focus, like a physical product focus, than it is a service focus, or something that's focused on as something as a part of a piece of code or something that you can maintain over time. And so the idea here is that desktops, once they move into being a cloud asset, they're part of the cloud infrastructure, become not something so much that you think of as buying and holding for a period of time and then throwing away. They become a part of your infrastructure that you invest in over time. And that it's really a place where you can generate your own intellectual property that's a core part of what you do to build and administer your computing environment for your end users. So when you launch with Amazon Workspaces, we include APIs, so that is the programming interfaces. Those are available via command line interfaces and SDKs. We include integration with tools like CloudWatch for monitoring, CloudTrail for auditing. And so all of those core functions you expect to be there for other AWS services exist for your desktops now. So things that you would normally use as part of building an overall solution for, let's say, a software product you're building, you can now do those same things for your desktops and end user computing. What this means is you can begin to invest in real monitoring, management, and automation of your desktops in a way that you never did before, because you know that's something that's an asset that's going to continue to be there over time and continue to be something you can evolve and invest your development activities into. What this has led to is customers are doing some really cool things with automation around their desktops. So they're investing in being able to launch and terminate in an automated fashion. I know Ron's going to talk a little bit about this in his session as well. Also monitoring and taking actions based on logins and other things that they see from the workspace, signals of indication of behavior, things that are going on in those environments. And then, of course, monitoring and patching. So being able to actually monitor more like you do server environments and have those consistently on environments. And then patching, in particular, becomes really powerful with workspaces. So obviously, Microsoft releases patches with some frequency, as I'm sure we've all noticed. Same thing on the Linux side, actually, with the Linux desktops. And so there's a need to be able to patch those in an ongoing basis. With a traditional desktop or laptop in particular, you have this real problem with those devices being offline. So that is that they get closed, people go home for the day, turn off the device. Suddenly you can't get access to it to do anything with it. So with Workspaces, of course, you've got APIs that will launch the workspace, pull it back out of hibernation, and of course with always-on workspaces, they're simply up and running. And so you've got the option to do any of these activities while the end user is not even engaged with that device. So we actually see much higher compliance rates with patching, with updates, with the workspaces than we would with a traditional end user device, partially because they're not able to close the laptop and walk away, partially because they're not able to interrupt to the update process. So they can't do anything to prevent that patch from being applied. So very, very different approach in that sense. So, you know, with, again, to kind of summarize this a little bit, with Workspaces, the idea here is you can take the time to really begin to turn desktop provisioning, management, monitoring, and patching from being something that's a very manual effort that you have a bunch of people doing and try and train a help desk on, to something where you have builders developing and building solutions that let this become an automated part of your overall workforce management, your overall team management infrastructure. All right, with that, I want to hand things over to Ron Bledsoe. He's from Bridgewater, and he's going to talk a little bit more about how Bridgewater is using Workspaces to solve business challenges they've faced, and talk a little bit about the security model and security approaches that they've undertaken. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you. So Bridgewater Associates, for those of you who don't know, is ostensibly the world's largest hedge fund. We have approximately $150 billion under management. We have a lot of very sensitive proprietary data that is very valuable to a lot of people outside of our organization, which is kind of a long-winded way of saying we care a lot about security. We've been on the Workspaces journey for a couple of years now, and now we've gotten to the point where we're slightly north of like 1 workspace per employee, right? Because never when we started on this would we have imagined getting to that scale, but then besides being more functional than we had anticipated, there were a bunch of use cases that we just didn't even imagine that we were able to meet with Workspaces. Quickly, like how we got started, just even down the path, was first and foremost, we wanted a better user experience, but we wanted a better, secure user experience. Whether that be flexibility on when and how people connect to their computers, whether that is greater uptime, right? And the ability to kind of always stay productive, or always having the current version of Windows, right? Which is especially hard these days, seeing as how Windows versions seem to last for about 2 or 3 weeks. Secure lifecycle management, right? So that's the cradle to grave aspects of whether that's your supply chain, right? And knowing where your hardware comes from, or where it is in your build room deployed out on the floor, and whether or not it ends up erased and appropriately reprovisioned, or it ends up on eBay, right? Preventing data leakage. As I said, we have a lot of very sensitive information, and we wanted to find ways to keep our information where it needed to be. And then in general, just like reduce attack surfaces, right? And so especially with a traditional physical environment, you have a lot of attack surfaces that just begin at that kind of physical level. So when we got to Workspaces, we saw a lot of immediate gains, right? So the device dependency. So there's the bit where you don't care anymore what your user has in their hands, because the Workspaces environment's effectively walled off, right? And so if that device gets infected with malware, you don't care, right? If that device gets dropped in a toilet, you don't care, right? You just go to the store, you pick up a new piece of hardware, you're up and running again in minutes. You no longer have to worry about somebody stealing that thing and it ending up on eBay with all of your company data. Build provenance, right? So not having to secure a physical build room, not having to worry about that supply chain, not worrying about whether or not the appropriate disk wiping process was followed. And then when the actual build is laid onto the device, because of the automation involved, right? So we build all of our devices with code. We don't have to worry that something got injected into the build process, because it is automated from end to end. The security around the images themselves, right? They live in AWS, that's protected by all of your typical AWS controls, IAM roles, like for instance. Automated provisioning and deprovisioning. So we have effectively been able to, from the time a person starts at the company to the time they leave, all of that provisioning process is hands-off, right? Which is unbelievable, like compared to where we came from. We've seen so many benefits. One of the biggest benefits is you don't find a computer running in a closet anymore, right? It just doesn't happen, right? And I don't know how many of you have like a 100% accurate CMDB, but we're certainly not those people. But I do have a 100% accurate list of all of my running workspaces, right? Because I just go call the API, and that's authoritative, right? I know who it's assigned to, and then we use tagging to give us other information, like what sort of applications we layered on top of it, when this thing was created, and a bunch of other data that we pay attention to. For the end users themselves, really easy for them to adopt. I think most people are up and running within minutes. Like once you show them the new MFA tool that they had to use, the rest of it was something they already knew. And then rapid deployment and redeployment. And so I'll go into that a little bit more here. So a workspace is a combination is called the bundle. Right? A bundle is a virtual hardware type and the OS image. A lot of our workspaces started right when Win 10 went GA, and so they were running Windows 10 and 15.11, right? We were able to use the API, which is, if you're familiar with the Amazon API, there's really nothing to this, to figure out how to automate and scale quickly. So we went from a couple of dozen to thousands fairly quickly. But hey, new version of Windows. What do, right? So with the automation and with just the Workspaces architecture, we can now just replace the image in the bundle, right? And so, new version there. The ingestion process for new images is automated, and then you load that in, and then you kick off your automated rebuild process. And so the machines all come back running the latest image, and there's really nothing to it, right? One of the cool things we're in the middle of right now is we're replacing our entire control stack, right? And you can imagine a lot of tools and installing things at the kernel level. These aren't things you want to uninstall, right? These are things you just want to start over fresh. And so through kind of the automated rebuild process, we're able to first just swipe out that image again, say, OK, here's our new image with all our new configuration, and then say, OK, go, rebuild. Right? And so we literally could rebuild every computer in the company overnight. We're not going to, because there are all sorts of other problems that have nothing to do with Workspaces, with rolling out a new OS, but we could, right? And so we're going to be able to do in a couple of weeks what would have took us most of the year. And that's unbelievable, right? The other thing is, too, you can go backwards if you needed to, right? If I roll out 1809, it bricks everything, replace the image back with 1703 or whatever it was, redeploy again, and we're golden. All right. Design considerations, right? So there are a ton of different areas we can go into when it comes to secure design for Workspaces, but I want to focus on this one. If you are in an environment like ours, you have a traditional Active Directory, you want to have a lot of control over your VPC perimeter, and then you have a direct connect or something like that brings you back to Amazon. Now, let's say for a minute that you have 3 different classes of users, right? Starting with, say, your highly privileged users. So using the AD connector, you can create a dedicated AD connector for these highly privileged users, right? You have kind of a common set of security controls. But let's say you want to, I do care about what devices these people are using to connect because they're highly privileged. So I can use certificate authentication to know something about that device. I'm managing that device with my MDM or something like that. And they can't get in without that certificate. Well, let's say also I'm really paranoid about where these people are when they're accessing this content. So with IP access controls, I can whitelist IP addresses, whether that's a corporate network, whether that's a dedicated home office, whatever it is, right? But it's a whitelist, right? And if it's not on that list, they don't get in. Great. And then, of course, multi-factor authentication, right? These credentials, who knows where they're being used, who knows who's looking over a shoulder, bring in that MFA. Right? So maybe for my standard set of users, though, I don't care as much, right? I'm less concerned or concerned about different things. So maybe I still want the certificate authentication, but you know what? I'm less restricted on where they do their work. So I remove the IP access controls, right? So you're working at home, that's fine. You're working at the coffee shop, I don't care. You're working on vacation in Europe, you shouldn't be working on vacation, but hey, go ahead. And then multi-factor authentication, because always use MFA. And then the other cool thing is telemetry, right? So the CloudWatch event, really, really useful, really helpful. So if you want to develop a baseline about what clients your end users are using, where they're connecting from, when they're connecting, how often they're connecting, the CloudWatch events, tremendously helpful, right? And so it's easy enough to run a report, say, show me using the integration with say an on-prem SIM tool to say, all right, how many people have connected from iOS in the last 2 weeks? And also tell me what IP addresses those people were connecting in, the workspace ID, who these people are, and allow me to develop a baseline around that. right? And from that, either you learn something about how your users are operating, or you find problems, right? Hey, why is Bob connecting from Singapore when he's next to me right now? Next thing, so let's say you have offshore consultants or something like that. Maybe you don't own their computers, so there's no certificate for you to authenticate them against. But you've given them an account. You want them to at least use multi-factor authentication, right? Or, like, if you want to take this a step further, you put each one of these people into their groups into their own VPCs, right? What that could give you is like a really clearly defined perimeter for each of these groups, right? Which allows you to apply different level of security controls at those perimeters. It makes it cleaner for you to monitor what's happening within that area. So, you filter out that noise, so to speak. And if you want to, you might offer different services in those VPCs, right? Maybe your offshore consultants need access to DynamoDB, but you don't want that in those other VPCs, and so you only let that service in that third VPC, right? All of these things, they don't stand on their own, so you do build in the integration with like your on-prem send tools. You bring in data sources from, like, say, Active Directory and your applications to kind of see how all of this stuff is gelling together, and then you can really have this like rich picture of what is happening, when it's happening, and figure out if you need to do something about it, right? As I said, this is just one of many design choices that you could go with, and there are a ton of other areas we can get into. This is the only thing I wanted to show you guys for today. So as we get to questions, if you guys have specific questions about this or other areas, happy to answer those. But for now, I'll give you back to Nathan.
All right, thanks, Ron. Really appreciate it. All right, so thank you much, Ron, for taking the time to come out and give us a little more data. Just quickly, before we get to questions, I wanted to say thank you to everybody for coming, and then make sure everybody remembers there's a session survey here, so make sure you can fill that out. It really helps us learn more about how these sessions go and what to do to make them better. And then one quick reminder that we obviously have the evening reception coming up at 6 o'clock, so if folks want to stick around for that outside, should be a good time, have a lot of fun. And with that, I think we've got a good 15 minutes here for questions. So if people have questions they want to stand up and yell out, we can answer them up here. Otherwise, Ron and I'll be here afterwards, and we can grab some time down on the floor. So yeah.
What's the load like on the network, though? So
Yeah.
It's easy to say one or two people.
Totally.
But after 1,000, 5,000, what's that like?
Yeah. So the question is, what is the network load like for running a whole bunch of streaming sessions for Workspaces? I think I'll answer first, and then we'll get Ron's perspective in the real world. So what we see in general is average loads per workspace with a running streaming session are less than 200 kilobits per. It's not a huge load. There is a variability there. So as you see usage for 4K video, live streaming video coming down, that guy may be at 2 megs or 3 megs. You start to see that spike up. And so if you have to build for that really peak case, then you'd want to think about that. What most people build for is more an average case, 300 kilobits, 400 kilobits a second per user. So if you've got 10 gig links and things, it's quite a bit of traffic that can be handled there. Ron, have you guys seen anything in practice on this?
I don't know, the best thing I could tell you is I don't pay attention to it, right?
Yeah,
I was worried about it in the beginning. We have, direct connects, and we have most of our users are connecting using like devices we manage, laptops using Wi-Fi. Our Wi-Fi reliability is a way bigger problem than the amount of bandwidth being used.
Yeah.
I don't pay attention to it every day.
Cool. Yeah. What's up?
You said that you support MFA, but Microsoft's literally done that for 24 years, I think.
Yeah.
How is that a benefit?
So it's a little bit of the subtlety. The question is how does MFA support a core differentiator? It is actually doing it as part of the authentication process to get into the desktop in all cases.
Done that since 1903.
Yeah.
I see what the point of it.
So I don't know, the distinction I'm trying to make is lost, but
Yeah, like I know, so physical desktops, like you can, your native MFA option.
Oh, maybe this is a VDI difference. Maybe that's the primary thing, is doing this under VDI versus doing it under physical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the idea that behind when you have a Windows 10, but the base operating system is Windows Server, right?
Yeah. So the question is, Windows is which operating system versions we support, Windows 10 versus Server 2016. So there's actually two different ways to do this. So with the license included product, what we offer is Windows Server 2016 with the Windows 10 desktop experience. Those code bases are obviously pretty similar. If you use BYOL, then you need to use Windows 10 Client OS to import under your licenses. So we do either of those. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I present applications such as Microsoft Project and RDP or something that I want to install to find a license for organization?
Right. So I'm sorry, is what you're trying to avoid the Windows licensing or the licensing for the application?
For the application,
For the-
let's say I want to have 200 contract users, but I don't want to install the license per machine. Because
Right.
It would be difficult. So you have a farm with this product. And
Yeah. So a couple of different answers there. So for Workspaces, you obviously would still need a license. It's going to depend on the license of the specific thing that you're talking about, but most of the software still wants to have a license per user. They don't necessarily have sort of a pool, of users concept. There are some software that I think do. I know Windows, for example, doesn't seem to be that way. So Windows itself seems to want to have a per user model regardless. There is a product called AppStream that we have, and so for AppStream, that may be better for what you're describing, where you're talking about having sort of a single instance that people are connecting to, where they've got the application kind of replicated multiple different times. Yeah. Yeah.
how do you get user buy-in?
How do you get user buy-in? I think this is a Ron question.
Where I work in most places, they want a physical laptop. You give them a workspace, they see it as a remote terminal, but they want their desktop to tackle that.
So I think it depends on your environment. For us, being in a high security environment and being really concerned with data exfiltration, malware, and that sort of thing, your options are kind of like use a workspace or be chained to your desk, right? Because we're not going to let you take your physical desktop outside of the building, right? And you're not going to drag this thing into a conference room, but we will let you use a workspace anywhere that you happen to be at that time, right? And that was the huge value add for people. And then there was a part of like the security benefits for us going away from physical hardware were so significant that you have to have a very compelling reason not to go there, right? If you were in a different environment, I don't know, but from our perspective, there were very few alternatives for our users.
Do you allow them to customize their desktop?
Within certain limitations, right? Like nobody gets administrator privileges and that sort of thing.
They can put a background image over the cat or something like that.
Sure.
And when you reveal the image, you can keep all those customizations.
So depending on the nature of the customization, there are some things that are specific to the user profile. They persist on a separate hard drive, a D drive that's virtual. And so if it is one of those sorts of settings, then yes. If it's not, then no.
So basically, the way that we do the builds is that there's a root volume and then a user volume, so C and D. Basically, if you're moving between bundles like that, you're moving to the different OS versions, you would jettison the C drive and then restart, but you'd keep that D drive. So any application that lives in D, which we try and set it up so that everything would live there, will just be persisted. Yeah. Yeah.
Workspaces primarily for like office workers, spreadsheets and stuff, or do developers have workspaces?
So we do both, right? The developer use case is one of our more challenging ones, but we do have a significant number of developers using Workspaces, and then we have some that we have like kind of augmented computers for some of our very kind of resource-intensive workloads, but those are heavily resource-intensive because of our proprietary applications, right? Not necessarily like indicative of what a typical developer in another company might have.
Yeah.
So I have not even attempted to get Docker on the Windows workspaces, mostly because I think the guys who really want to do the Docker work aren't ready yet to go over to Windows.
Yeah, why don't you follow up with me afterwards? I know this has come up a couple of times. We'll see if we can come up with the right answer for you. On the broader topic of developer desktops, the other place we see a lot of adoptions in the Linux side. So a lot of Linux developers now. People who are developing for Amazon Linux 2.0 anyway use the desktop as the place to do it pretty commonly.
So what do you use as physical terminal? Is it the Windows machine? Is it the client?
So we use a variety of terminals. Like for the most part, we like to have a managed device, which is usually for us, it's managed by our MDM. So anything that we can manage on our own, though.
Do the users access using the browser, or is it like
We use the client.
Yeah, the native client. Most client customers are using native client of some type. So browser access is certainly there and used, but the bigger chunk is native. All right, yeah.
So one pain point I've had is not being able to assign more than one
Workspace per user, yes. So the question is, can you assign more than one workspace to user? The distinction is that you can assign one workspace per user per directory. And that's obviously because we're relying on AD as the primary auth backing store, which means that you only have one username effectively. And so the solution really is to have more than one AD or to issue separate usernames for now, yeah.
You mentioned that you can monitor and patch at all times. I'm just curious, is that only available if you enable maintenance mode?
Yeah, so the question was, you can monitor and patch at all time. Is that only if you enable maintenance mode? There's a few different answers there. So obviously an always-on workspace would always be on, and so that would be a yes, you can do that even without maintenance mode. With an auto-stop workspace, you can just start it. You can issue a start command and start working on it without maintenance mode. So you could tell it to go to launch, and then it could start patching. Maintenance mode simply can let you block users from connecting, which means you can get sort of a protected time period during which you know that the user won't do something untoward to that instance while you're patching. Okay? Yeah. Yeah.
guys using any specific device management, like an AppSense or anything like that, or bringing it into an MDM to control calls on a machine?
Are you talking about on the workspaces, I assume? So the question, are we using some sort of like a profile management tool, or personalization tool like AppSense? We've tried a couple of different tools there, and like my default answer would be, you can use whatever you would use with your physical devices, is at least what we found. For the most part, we like to use, or like to simplify that particular side of things and pay the cost of people when they have to go ahead and personalize their own things again, which fortunately is rare because of the way that the user profile is preserved when you rebuild the devices. And so if part of troubleshooting workspaces become like somehow corrupted, we rebuild those. The users don't really notice because their profile is preserved. So we've gone away from using kind of the profile management tools, but it's kind of up to you and all of the things that you need to do. You got to run that configuration somewhere. So for us, we try to keep most of that stuff out.
Is DLP linked to this? How do we, data getting from the local client?
Yeah. So this is DLP. So in general, the access out of the workspace using the native clients is controllable with group policy. So you can do things like turn off local printing, turn off cut and paste, all of those types of configurations you can either enable or disable for being able to restrict access of data going out. Okay.
You guys do anything outside of the policies with your users for
You're talking about access on, for which pieces? What were you? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, so the question is, can you lock down anything outside of that, you know, in terms of not just group policy based? You know, the simple answer is these are Windows desktops. You can do anything you'd like that you would normally do with a Windows desktop. So they're all you know, domain join Windows desktops. You own the security group and the network traffic coming out of them. So anything you do on a physical desktop that you want to install, you can do. Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. There's certainly still those things do exist still for the Windows side for sure. Yeah.
For Bridgewater company guy, for like Amazon Marketplace, do you guys use Trend Micro's AV client, or do you have Amazon installed?
Just thinking about like how specific I get about like what we do. I think for the most part, we run our desktops like we run the workspaces in very much a similar way as we would our physical desktops. The tools that we decide to run on them, like we get the one from the best place that we can find and the one that makes the most sense for us to run in that situation. For the most part, I don't think we're doing much with the Amazon Marketplace though.
All right, want to take one more? Yeah.
Thinking about any need for SCCM or distribution points off that
It depends, right? I think there's a migration path, right? And the easiest thing for most people is to do what you do within your physical environment in AWS to start. You do open up a lot more options, though, about what your future management could look like once you go virtual. And like all of the benefits of there. So
yeah, we see most customers still doing pretty traditional desktop things most of the time, and it's just because they still got physical desktops still in a lot of cases, so it's easy to integrate. We really took the approach from the beginning that hey, you don't have to get rid of AD, you don't have to get rid of SCCM, it's just another Windows desktop. But realistically, yeah, if we also see more customers that are coming in at more greenfield saying, you know what, I'm just going to take a rebuild and replace method, right, and not have any of that patching. And then that way they're doing image management. And, you know, in the VDI world, this has been pretty common for a while. So it's certainly a way to go. But I think most customers are still using SCCM and other tools like that. Yeah. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up. We're still around outside if you want to grab us immediately after here. But really appreciate everybody coming. Thanks a lot.
thank you.